Now you're gonna pull those pistols and whistle Dixie.
Let's ride.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special edition of the End Time Tribune. It's good to be with you tonight. You know, ladies and gentlemen, this great march of return that has started between the Palestinians and the Israelis is just the tip of the iceberg, ladies and gentlemen. We have some extremely serious things going on. I mean, this week, North Korea and China got together. North and South Korea announced they're going to be getting together. Ah, yes. The kings of the East do gather to take counsel one with another. We have got the expulsion of Russian diplomats out of well over 20 countries since the United States answered the call of the religious right in moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. You know, Brian and I was having a private conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is common knowledge. The first thing officially done between two countries that have established peace is the opening of both embassies and consulates. This is common knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. It is amazing to me some of the things I see going on. It's been reported in the news that Israeli stealth fighters provided by the United States of America have been witnessed flying in Iranian territory. Ladies and gentlemen, I seriously hope that you're really paying attention to what's really going on. We had the authorization of a sacrifice close to the Temple Mount, an act that serves no religious purpose that has been biblically mandated. Everybody knows that. This only served as a clear provocation to the Arab world. It's the only purpose it served. The intercontinental ballistic missile that Russia just tested, it wasn't manufactured in the 70s, ladies and gentlemen. It has multiple warheads that can be deployed independently. This, of course, means that it can evade any countermeasures. It can just drop one of the nukes, keep proceeding to target and obliterate anything that has locked on to it. It approaches the target at speeds that are really quite irrelevant concerning anything other than electronic countermeasures anyway. And everybody's so happy that Passover and Easter and April Fool's Day all seems to coincide this year. You know, looking at the stock market, I realized that everything's just fine. No matter how badly the stock market bombs Monday through Thursday, they always end on a good note on Friday. By the way, that was a play on words in reference to the real Good Friday. How many of you are ready to be rudely awakened should something happen? You know, let me ask you this. It's amazing how this generation has polluted and downgraded everything. There was a time when honor and respect was the prevailing stabilizing forces in this society. And you would ask the question, is your house in order? Meaning, have you said all your goodbyes to all your loved ones? But this generation has managed to even corrupt that. Now they ask if you've completed your bucket list. You're all in for a rude awakening. And this is going to catch you by complete and utter surprise. Even though what is coming has been documented for thousands of years. What will it take to rattle your cage? I wonder what it's going to take. Brian, what's your thoughts on the current events that's unraveled just since our last broadcast? It seems to me that, oh my goodness, we're a whole lot closer than just 2 minutes to midnight. I don't care what the doomsday clock people say. Brian, your thoughts?
Well, you know, maybe I'd almost like to start with the conversation that was just had in my home not too far back, because, folks, we've warned about this so many times about being entertained to death. Our roommate had asked me the question, I haven't seen any of this come up in the news. So I asked, let me guess, Russian collusion, Roseanne Barr, the fights between the Crusaders. I'm sorry, did I hurt anyone's feelings? Fights between the Crusaders and these teenage kids that were just, had a guy walk in who was a proven white supremacist, make America great again. The whole ball of wax. And we've got all the right-wing puppets out there that are attacking them publicly on the media. You see, this is what you're being barraged with. And folks, if you don't think this was not all put into place on purpose to keep you in a virtual reality entertainment bubble, take some time and look into it. Okay, they started instituting things, really went deeply into place after World War II. As a matter of fact, you might be shocked at the fact of who the American government was hiring to do this very thing. And this is documented. You can see the interviews right from the people's mouths that were perpetrating this stuff. It's nice to run around in all the conspiracy circles where they make everything up. It's a little different when you can actually, see the interviews, see things being documented by the people on the inside doing it. But instead, where's everybody else? Let's talk about where everybody's looking right now. They think that all their infamous little eschatology scholars are actually feeding them properly. Yet here's the thing. I went to take a check this morning just to find out what all of everybody's favorite scholars are talking about right now. Look, I know that most of you out there have your cable television. Just go to that favorite right-wing propaganda outlet, push play. Turn around and do yourself a favor. Go over to their shows and push play. They all have the same talking points. And they bring up a little tiny blip about what has transpired here in Israel. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but they're not even qualified. They have no authority to even speak on these topics, which they thoroughly do not understand. And that's just beginning with my rebuke. I'm not certain how else to put it because of what I'm seeing happening. First off and foremost, look, folks, I can give a test to some preschool children after having them sit down and read the Bible from the front page to the back, and they will pass with flying colors. I wish I was joking, but I'm not. God goes out of his way to tell you what we would be witnessing on the earth in these days. He repeats himself over and over and over again, and we are seeing every little variable play out right in front of our eyes. But if you're being entertained to death by these people that are calling themselves experts in these fields, they have dubbed themselves your watchmen as you dish out $95 to $150 here to go to their big conferences. I don't know how to help you. I am trying with every fiber in my body. This week alone, Matthew can verify this just when I said, why don't you go take a look? There's so many majorly important things happening on a worldwide scale that just this week alone, you're not going to be able to make it through my feed. Because Twitter really, the reality of why I'm using Twitter is it's a place where I can keep track of these stories. So when I need to get to them, for instance, when we're on air, they're right there. Okay, that's the reality of why I'm using this social network. I don't, at this point, trying to even get involved in conversations that are going on. It is just baffling because everybody has got brought into, and this is what the terminology that I sort of came up with this week after finding out something about our infamous hot topic global debate on climate change. This is called manufactured dissent, people. If you're out there engaging in these divisive topics and arguing with people and doing all this, you may want to check yourself. You are not to be doing that, period. Okay, and I'm not even discussing all the divisive doctrines. No, I'm on a whole other level here. Things going on in the United States, for instance, it is just one big divide that they have manufactured for you, and people have walked right into their trap. Folks, why does the Lord say gentle as doves, wise as serpents? This is got to stop, folks. If you're getting in a spot where you're trying to find out what's going on in the world and you're just hitting the wall of entertainment, look, I'm going to tell you right now, having to keep on top of this is not easy. I have multiple applications, be it on my phone, my tablet, my computer, that I have to use to get a gauge on what's going on. But if you stick to certain news sites that you're getting from this, that, or the other direction, specifically within this Western world, okay, look, when you go look at what the facts are being reported on the ground in all of these major places in the world, because right now it's the entire world that's about to explode. You're not seeing what's going on. The hot topics again this week. Folks, do you understand right now that your right-wing talking point that they've got you pulled back into again about the quote-unquote conspiracy that's happening, that was going on in the 2016 election with the FBI agents and the tweets and blah, blah, blah? I hope you're aware that they've just copy and pasted the same story that they were spouting, maybe 3 months ago? Oh, and by the way, on the other side of the spectrum, where they're doing the watch the Russian collusion scandal, they're doing the same thing, copy-paste. This is documented that a vast majority of these people that have the title of journalist in this day and age, they're not writing anything. They're copy-paste. There's good investigative journalists out there. Go out of your way to find them. But get out of the entertainment. Get away from this nonsense. If you think what they're talking about here is important right now, man, oh man, you're not going to see this coming. You're going to be caught unaware. When we have what just transpired in Israel take place. Okay, folks, behind the scenes, starting around March 22nd, this started coming to light. Okay, that's almost over a week ago. And I wouldn't be shocked if I start looking backwards a little bit more, and it was already, obviously, out there. So, this week, sent Matthew some messages on some other things that we're working on the background that are of utmost importance. But then all of a sudden, my blood just ran cold because I pull up from Reuters News 100 snipers to be deployed at the March of Return. I immediately knew what was coming. And it happened. Folks, you got to understand that they started this on Passover, which so happens to also coincide with Good Friday. And if you don't understand the importance of why I'm making the point of how those dates are suddenly intersecting, you have to go look into how they started doing the calculations going back pretty far in history, in the beginning stages of the Roman Church and so on and so forth. It's enough to make your head hurt already trying to understand their calculations of where they decide to state it's Good Friday, how to come to their conclusion of Easter Sunday. They don't really typically follow the same calendar that we should be following. These two dates just intersecting alone is enough to really make you take a pause. But what I just don't understand is why nobody was talking about this as this was coming. You know, and we had several discussions once, because when something like this happens, folks, personally with me, this is when I go into overdrive mode. Everybody, you need to understand that to even attempt to address this topic, this is not simple. We cannot do justice to even attempting to explain all of the little things, historically speaking, that bring this into context. Okay, I have book upon book upon book upon book covering many topics in this area. Giving blanket statements, we can't do this justice. There's not enough time in the day, in the month, in the year, because you have to have perspective to even comprehend what is happening here. And it's so much. I do watch both sides of the story. Now, even though I may not post both sides of the story, and there's a reason why, I watch both sides. I've been watching what is being said within portions of the Arab world, most notably things that are being said by the Palestinians as this arose, not from the Western or Israeli sources. I've been watching what's coming out of Israeli sources, as well as Haaretz, is one of my favorite sites because they're a little more balanced. Right now, the UN is already talking about there is going to be a major investigation. We live in an age where everything is able to get on video. We live in an age where we have drones, we have satellite. Okay, those things are all time date stamped, folks. You cannot falsify digital timestamps. There's statements from one side stating that there was no provocation. There's statements coming from the other side that is stating there was provocation. The truth is going to come out. There is video footage. But what I do know is in the background, we have at least bare minimum, and I'm hoping that my program here updated, because it basically quite well at the bottom of this article from, well, it's Middle East Monitor. When I want to look at what the other side is saying, they are a very good source to at least get an indication. And there's several more out there, folks. There really is. But let me see if this is the article, because it will give you the name of the three factions that are currently inside of the Gaza Strip. Folks, it's not as simple as it's just Hamas. Okay, and we know full well this has been documented nonstop. Okay, here's the article. You can find this under the Great Return March signifies the start of new defiance campaign on Middle East Monitor. But they at least list at the bottom of this article, the very last paragraph. The Great Return March has the support of all Palestinian factions, including Hamas, Fatah, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and Islamic Jihad. The protest is expected to continue daily until 15th of May and the 70th anniversary of the NAPCA. Okay, folks, this is the 70th anniversary of the 1948 UN resolution declaring Israel as a nation. It's going up until then. Almost any article right now is going to point this out. All of this has been set in motion because of Donald Trump's statement and his decision concerning Jerusalem and the embassy. Now, I was questioned by what I is probably a listener, don't you think this is a good thing when that announcement was made? I didn't respond. I did that intentionally because I had every alarm in my body go off the immediate moment that I even heard rumbling going on about this announcement being made. Because I knew where this was leading. This was leading to where we're sitting now. We had the protest breakout already in the midst when that announcement was made, leading up to it, all of it. The entire world has realized that this administration, well, it's playing the role of a treacherous dealer. I don't know how else to state it more precisely because that's what's happening. Some of these articles, and you'll see some of your infamous experts, they're saying so much for the Oslo Accords. Again, are you even qualified to allow those words to come out of your mouth? Because you're not. I have studied what has happened at the time frame of the Oslo Accords in depth. I saw the filmed documentation of the talks happening, be it at the White House, at the time of Clinton, Israel, from all the major people involved, documented interviews from, for instance, Arafat, the PLO. You can find this all out there in a documentary that was made, believe it or not, probably about the, maybe around 2000, late 90s. Okay, folks, everything is documented. You need to understand something. Every single person, every leader involved with those Oslo Accords, Anwar Sadat, Yitzhak Rabin, Yasser Arafat, because yes, folks, this has all come to light as well. They have all been assassinated. If that's not enough for pause, I don't know what is. There's so many variables that go into this. Like I said, you can watch. I mean, they literally have the cameras going the whole 9 yards as they're doing the talks here in the United States with the United States leaders. Okay, you can even see the comments going on with Henry Kissinger and Brzezinski. Okay, your blood runs cold the very moment you watch Brzezinski walk up to the Israeli leader and state, do you want to play chess? But it takes knowing about his grand chessboard strategy. You see, the Israeli leader knew what he was doing. He was stunned. And his response, to paraphrase it, came down to this. During the pogroms in Russia, leading up to World War II, when the Russians started also capturing the Jews and throwing them into prisons, he let them know flat out, the last time I played chess is when I had an operative of Bolshevik Soviet Russia come to my door. Brzezinski got the message, and you can see it come out of his own mouth from the interview. As they go on to explain, his wife states he plays chess all the time. It's also common knowledge that Henry Kissinger from day one has stated, you want to control the world? You keep the Middle East in flames. Brzezinski, you control Central Asia, you control the world. Apply that to everything we're happening as we speak. Okay, folks, Russia, China, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, about 1 billion stans at the end. I've studied all of Central Asia in depth, its ancient history and forward. It's all beyond the river Euphrates, folks. Anything past that line, that's the kings of the East. Even if they've convinced you it's Gog and Magog, no. I've done the archaeogenetics. I mean, it was interesting. I got one of our listeners asked a question about an archaeological report that I put up. Let me answer that. Because I was talking about the elongated skulls. That it's been proven that this is a Central Asian trait. The first time it really began to appear, going in, at least in the Middle Ages, was when the Huns showed up. Now, we did an entire program on the Huns. From information that you're only going to get in a very difficult way, getting a hold of these texts, it's a little pricey. The Chinese knew about the Huns going back from ancient times. Okay? They've documented it completely. Most Middle Ages scholars will tell you, we have no idea where they came from. Western Middle Age scholars that didn't look beyond the Euphrates. But that's where your elongated skulls, Central Asia. Okay, they did and as the article brings out, this is the new big thing in archaeology, is the archaeogenetics, because it's changed our complete understanding of everything we used to think. We've got people out there trying to fool you that these are moon men that are showing up with these elongated skulls in South America. Okay, folks, again, you need to look at the archaeogenetics, because this has gotten to the point where it's becoming common knowledge. People in Central Asia, even stretching down, going through India and a lot of those other places in those regions, are the same genetic. The DNA, the genetics, it's the same people. Okay? It's how this ended up in South America. That story concerning them finding they find elongated skulls in some women in a middle-aged cemetery. And they tell you in there, we did genetic studies, what they were eating. They were clearly Hun. So that answers that question. But it also helps to illustrate the fact that the archaeogenetics is excruciatingly important, because it's rewriting everything. We have a solid understanding of history now. And look, for multiple years, I have been bringing forward this information that has now been proven by the archaeogenetics that is also backing it up. This is important, even in light and in context of everything we're looking at now. But the next time you hear that Gog and Magog is China and Russia, please hit the stop button. Don't read the article. Don't bother with it. Matthew's looked through all the evidence of all the work that I've done. Okay, folks, this is not up for debate no more. Nor is it up for debate anymore concerning what's happening in Israel. You know, folks, and there was a really interesting genetic report that was released, because the Bible told us this all along anyways. You know, these people that they refer to as Palestinians, okay, they've done the genetic testing, and it'll tell you what the Bible told you all along. Genetically speaking, they're brothers. And the Bible warned us they were going to fight against each other in this day. Now, when you have our quote-unquote mainstream academic communities reinforcing what the Bible is telling you all along, that ought to cause you to take pause. And this wraps this around to what I'm pointing out before. What happened here with the Oslo Accords? Look, folks, who is in line after Yitzhak Rabin. What happened on the ground in the midst of these elections? Terror groups started hitting. Things definitely started to explode in Israel. People in Gaza, they weren't happy with what Arafat did, the PLO did. They saw him as a traitor at this point. Terror attacks began to happen on the ground. This is documented through the roof. There's actually a very eye-opening documentary. As a matter of fact, if you go out there and look for it, I found it on Amazon. This is multiple Shin Bet, which is, to break it down in simple terms, it's a lot more complex, obviously. But they are basically the intelligence operation organization that deals with things on the ground inside of the land of Israel. These interviews are very, very eye-opening because there's also their personal take on things as well after they were no longer working with Shin Bet. During this time, because this was kind of the stopping point for pretty much the vast majority of it, they do talk about what was happening there right after the Oslo Accords. There's so many things that happened, one after another after another. And, I can read body language. It's pretty easy to do. These guys weren't lying. Stuff was going down. Okay? These things did happen. So a lot of stuff that never even hit your regular mainstream press. At the same time, a vast majority of them have walked away also stating this. In the process of trying to bring security, to bring peace, there are times where things have gone way too far. And if you pay attention to some of the things that have been going on in the Israeli politics, for instance, you're going to see this massive divide between the right, or most notably the Likud, and the left. It's really important to pay attention to this. It's really important to pay attention to interviews that are given by these people on the ground concerning how they feel about these things. Okay, you have some of these people that are, some of them were leaders in varying places, IDF leaders, Assad leaders. You have very Shin Bet leaders. They'll show you on the ground. It's like we're neighbors with these people. They're our friends too. Folks, me and Matthew discussed this last night. We're not anti-Israeli, nor are we anti-Palestinian, but we are for people. And this topic is so complex, these variables. Just like this paragraph I read from this article, I've known about all the groups operating in the Gaza, at least in the last couple of years, for quite some time. It just came into the press. I've known about this for a while, and this has actually been talked about going into the 80s even, that there's links between Hamas and with Tehran. Okay, so this has been out there for a long time. Some of these groups tied in with varied, what they refer to as extremist groups within the Islamic religion, within the Muslim world. There's even ties with the Muslim Brotherhood as well. And that's something I would keep as a note for some time in the future. There is at some point that this topic is going to have to be addressed in depth. But you see, that's what's happening, at least on that part of this equation. But you will also have to understand what's going on as well for the Palestinian refugees. We have them spread out multiple places. You have them in Lebanon. You have groups of them in Syria, down in Sinai. We have an entire community of them in South America. The Gaza Strip what's been happening there lately, folks. We've talked about this on our program. It's been in at least the media that I pay attention to about what's happened with the electric crisis and about the fact that they can no longer supply the oil energy to keep that running. It's responsible, I believe it was an Arabic nation that was doing this. It was basically keeping everything going. They stopped funding. Okay, what's pretty much, they're having massive issues within that. You've got a humanitarian crisis that's happening as well in this area, and this has been documented repeatedly. Not a simple situation. There are things happening on both sides. There are good things, there are bad things on both sides. And people, you really got to sit back and you need to understand this history. You need to look into this stuff deeply. You just can't come out there and repeat things that you're hearing these other people saying. Critically think, look deeply at these topics and realize that this is not simple. Go back and look throughout history. Start looking even from, there was something rather frightening that came into the media concerning the coins that have been found. And they just released it in the media at this point in history about this being in the last final between the war between the Jewish people and the Romans, as the temple is about to be destroyed in 70 AD. And there's two statements. The coin is either from this point or it's from this point. We're right previous to the destruction of the 70 AD. We even have documentation, we can take this further back as to when some of the people from Israel began to settle in different places in the world. And you actually have from multiple nations, it's documented, even during the time of Alexander the Great, during the Roman eras. But it really started happening, especially at the time of, when the Persian Empire came to power with Cyrus the Great. But you had a lot of your Jewish people, the Israeli people, tribe of Benjamin, Levites. And you see, that's when you say that terminology for Jew, that's what sort of encompasses this. And yet there's many tribes that are starting to come home, just as the Bible said they would. But many ancient historical texts document this, that they were going and moving into what we would refer to as the European continents now, west, east, up even into a lot of these other areas. It was happening then. Obviously, after things happened in 70 AD, you had more people moving into those areas. You have them going down to Africa and some of these Arabian nations. They're spread out quite far throughout the world. This is when you get to about 1897 is when you have to start looking into not the fictional, the propaganda that was intentionally done up with their elder protocols of Zion, folks. That's propaganda. This is common knowledge of where and who was behind that. No. You need to actually study the history of the beginning of the Zionist movement. There's a lot of complex things going on here. Once again, not cut and dry. They were actually they were looking for land in another place even, so that they had a place of safety. Now, this persecution has been going on. The timeline is just staggering, folks, when you really understand it, when you look at how bad things really got on top of it. There were multiple players involved that were guilty with this. You had many of the European nations. You had sporadic outbursts even within the what we refer to as the Arabian nations as well, where they had their own pogroms that would go into place. You had disagreements and agreements within the founding factors within the Zionist movement. It's very complex. You got starting points in 1897. You know, starting points in 1899. You move it forward. As I said, the place that they were actually looking at first was not modern Israel. They wanted a place of safety. And if you know the history, you can completely understand why. But we see some very confusing terminology in this day and age. We always get we have the Zionist, it's brought up. They use that terminology. Then we have, in the same lines, we'll also have anti-Semitic attacks being linked with portions of this, of things that are being said. The resemblance between the modern Zionism that they refer to as opposed to when this movement started, there's a lot of variables that are quite different. It's important to understand this when engaging in this topic. It's important to understand what's been going on between the right and the left in Israel. It's important to understand the history of the Likud party. It's important to understand the history, Benjamin Netanyahu, for instance, to start seeing what's happening right in front of our eyes. The events that transpired today, this is all going to come to light. But this is going to be dependent upon bias. Because one side's going to show you one side, the other's going to show you one side. This is where the critical thinking comes in and looking at what happened. Okay, we have reports. Okay, in Israel, they already had 100 snipers. That's the first thing that I came across. Had been hired. They had been given the orders, fire at will. Okay, we know this. Military, multiple protocols had been set in place for what happened today. We know this as well. We have statements we can't even verify that are being claimed from the other side of the story. There's claims that they found some drawn-up document that Netanyahu initiated to start a war. But, folks, we can't look until we have verifiable proof that's bearing false witness. I don't want to call one side a liar. I don't like calling the other side a liar, but we need to have valid evidence when something like this is stated. And this is the issue, is that's just it. We have to look at the evidence. It was stated very early from the Israeli side that immediately tires were being burned, bottles were being thrown. We have seen this happen before. Okay, we know this has happened many times before. But I don't yet have any kind of documentation that I've been able to find today that is giving any idea of what happened. But everybody knows where this is going. Reuters released multiple stories that this is about to explode. This is just the first day. This ends on the 15th of May. And they're right by stating that this is about to explode. Really hope the people understand the ramifications of what has been set in motion. What has been set in motion on top of it with moving that embassy to Israel, to Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv, on the 15th of May, the 70th anniversary of the declaration of Israel becoming a nation. And, I'm sorry, I have to bring this up again. Okay, people, there's this common thing that everybody runs around talking about, that they became a nation in one day, and that's what that prophecy is referring to. Folks, you really, really might want to look into what was really happening behind the scenes. I mean, does everybody understand why it is that they were not permitted to hunt down the Nazi war criminals? They had to make a deal with a certain modern Babylon that they wouldn't. They had to bring forward evidence against multiple nations and how they were working hand in hand with Nazi Germany. This is what happened. This is a long, ongoing process, everybody. And yet, why does nobody talk about any of this? I brought this up before. In the beginning, early stages of Zionism, they were looking at living elsewhere. If memory serves me correctly, I believe it was somewhere in Africa. I might be misquoting. I'd have to go back through the history book I have on the topic. But it's also come to light on top of it as well that the very reason, the full reality when the Balfour Declaration was brought to pass. You see, if you don't understand the imperialism, colonialism of what was going on with Britain up until they lost being the major power player at the end of World War II, they got stretched a little thin and then made some moves in the Middle East that bankrupted them. This is all documented as well. But look, folks, the reason that they made that declaration, they wanted somebody there to keep control of that region so they had their continual access to the Suez Canal. And this is documented through the roof. This is why Britain actually allowed the Balfour Declaration. And I don't know how many of the the eschatology scholars out there have brought this to anybody's attention. But this is historical documented fact. Okay, they put all this in place just so they could have control. People, do you understand that the biggest, everybody talks about the structure running our governing body here, which, like I mentioned last week, the military industrial complex, that's a better terminology. It's a little broader than that. Right now, we don't need to go beyond that. But one of their main controlling factors was the East India Trading Company, depending on what time in history. Okay, you had the royalty, you had the parliament, however the governing body works, and then you had the merchants. Suez Canal was very important to them. The moment this is done, British espionage, Philby, I brought him up many times. Son got busted being a dual agent, fled to Russia, set up Ibn Saud, Saudi Arabia. Sole purpose was to make all this not happen. I can point you in the direction of at least bare minimum 20 books that are very well documented with all the proof of how multiple different groups were set in place to oppose the Jewish people coming into Israel after the Balfour Declaration. You can easily find verifiable, good stories on this, even on the internet. History books are always way better, though. But that's why they set in place Ibn Saud. One person pulling this stunt, and he was the British espionage. But then we had two people. Oh, that's right, because Philby's was father, son. But then we had two brothers here in America. The infamous Dulles brothers. Okay, folks, they started basically as attorneys for all your Wall Street and all your bankers and all that. And then they get involved. World War II comes along, stint in the OSS, move along. Well, rest is history. We know who was at the beginning stages of the starting of the CIA, all the way on down the board. It's not really the relevant portion here, though. It's like I said, this history is important. We've had the right wing. This is documented. Just through the roof. The right wing in the United States has continually worked against the Israelis, against the Jewish people on a continual basis. The very first prime minister in Israel, you'll notice that there's a little gap in time where he steps down. It's because this nation was taken over by a right-wing administration right at that point. And he knew the betrayals that were coming because, like I said, to even get what happened there on May 15th within the UN delegation, they had to strong arm. They had to show, look, we have all the documentation of what was going on. That tells you something when you hit the fast forward button, because everybody believes that what is happening, that he stands with, that they stand with Israel. Folks, have you forgotten what happened when he was out in the Middle East? I mean, I watched it live. Okay, folks, I watched the live feed coming through Reuters as they sat there with the cameras. Okay, they signed over billions of dollars worth of weapons to all of the Gulf nations. Iran is in the crosshairs now. It has been for a long time, obviously. This week, early in the week, just as Mohammed bin Salman is here, all of a sudden missiles fly out of Yemen from the Houthi, hit Riyadh. And of course, all of a sudden, they're stating that they were given these ballistic missiles by Iran. While with bin Salman, filmed by the press, President Donald Trump, Mohammed bin Salman, sitting there. Well, what's going to happen with the Iran deal? His response was wait and see. We've heard that response before, folks. Like Matthew brought up, 2 F-35s. These are stealth fighters, folks. They've been over Iran. They were painting targets. Now, you've been warned about the RAM, Media Persia. You were warned to watch everything that's actually happening in real time right in front of us. You know, folks, it caught Matthew and I's attention real quick. As one of the live on-the-ground news stories pointed out, they're also coming from the Negev because you were told to watch there. Caught Matthew and I's attention when they just announced an Assyrian statue built from a replica built from syrup cans in London. The hidden enemy. Yeah, this just came out in the news in the same span of all this. All of a sudden, there we go. And your media, in the Western world, has got you focusing on everything that's not even worth the time that you take to click on that story or to even listen to it. So I was supposed to give maybe just an intro diatribe. I think I went a little beyond an intro diatribe, so maybe I should hand it back over to Matthew.
Well, I would certainly call that a little bit more than an introduction there. It's time for break. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian directed us to the book of Nahum in the prior broadcast. He asked me about a certain verse. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I'll read the verse. Because of the multitude of the whoredoms of the well-favored harlot, the mistress of witchcrafts, that selleth nations through her whoredoms, and families through her witchcrafts. I pointed out to Brian that the last two items, the selling of nations with sanctions and the selling of families, was through, well, not only the opiate crisis that the West is currently enduring, but all the vast pharmakia we peddle. But concerning the sanctions, you probably should listen to this very carefully. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, made this statement. Because as of this week, ladies and gentlemen, things have gotten really serious. Really serious. 26 countries have expelled Russian envoys. In relation to that, this is what he stated. When one or two diplomats are being expelled from this or that country, all the while whispering apologies in our ear, we know for sure this is the result of colossal pressure, colossal blackmail, which unfortunately is Washington's main tool now in the international area, he said. It is hard to escape a conclusion that we were right when we stressed several times that there remain few independent countries in the modern world, including modern Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, you know where you're going? I'll tell you where you're going. Wherever she wants you to go. I bet most of the listeners of this broadcast has never even read the book. You know what? I bet most of the listeners that claim to be eschatology experts don't even know how many chapters Nahum has. You know why I say that? I had 3 different phone calls today from eschatology experts. I asked him a very simple question. Caught every single one of them off guard. They didn't even know. Didn't even know how many chapters that Nahum had. They got big ministries, though. At least they knew who to call. It's too bad that they didn't know the questions to ask me. Now, my brethren could have told them which questions they should ask me. My sisters would have been more than happy to counsel them on, look, you're going to have 15, 20 minutes with Matthew because it's his day off and he's busy and he's got tons of people to call. He's got tons of promises to keep today to the Lord his God. And he has a list every day off, and he tries to call every single one of them if it's the best to his physical ability. So they would have been more than happy to say, look, don't waste your time. Ask Matthew this, this, and this. But you weren't that wise. Now, I did give you the answers that you were seeking. It's just you were asking wrong questions. We'll be right back after this 11-minute, 24-second break. You are listening to the End Time Tribune. I am Matthew Miller. With me is my brother Brian Ingram. We serve the Lord our God. We peddle nothing. Nothing. We never have. We've never even monetized any of our channels. Any of our broadcasts have never been monetized. Do you know why she's called a harlot, don't you? There's a whopping big difference between services paid for and services that are not paid for. There's a clear distinction between those things. We live in a world of unknowing, of secrets, of blindness. But what if you were to find out that the very earth was crumbling beneath your feet, even as we speak? What if I were to tell you that America had deep, dark secrets kept from the public since its inception? What if unexplained phenomena had already been explained thousands of years ago? From a supposed natural disaster to fabled UFOs, it's going to be brought into the light with the one single document that is a testimony to the evidence of the future history of this planet. The End Time Tribune brings you the news of the coming apocalypse and cast light into the future darkness. Come and see. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the End Time Tribune. It's good to be with you today. Brian, what do you make of this new oil exchange that China has decided to establish. What's your take on this? Because I know you've done a whole lot of work into the Koch brothers and, well, specifically speaking, the workings of our harlotries. Maybe I better clarify for the listener, because I obviously don't need to clarify it for my own brother. Ladies and gentlemen, a harlot offers a service that you must pay for. Much like, well, the Russian foreign minister mentioning blackmail. Well, that's one way. The other way is you establish the most needed commodity for exchange on the planet because, well, water really don't cut it, does it? No. Commerce depends on transportation. Transportation has been standardized into one thing: oil. Doesn't really matter your mode of transportation. That is irrelevant. It all comes from the black gold, doesn't it? Jet fuel, train fuel, ship fuel, semi-truck fuel, same stuff. Refined to different stages, that's all it is. But now it seems that the mode and the currency that we use to sell our harlotries, and it's just one of the mechanisms, make no mistakes, it's just one of the mechanisms. Brian, what's your thoughts on it receiving for the first time in history some, competition? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, oh boy. Wasn't where I planned to go, but hey, why not bring it up? While I'm doing that, take a little look-see what I sent you on Skype. Everybody, in the meantime, while I bring this up, those listening live, pull up whatever program you may have or whatever, type in Negev into the Bible. But yes, I'm glad you brought this up because it's going to be a little hard to touch completely on this topic, I would say, tomorrow night. And I think this kind of sums up Matthew's question in an odd way. Caught this story. This was on March 26th that this was released through Bloomberg, which would have been Monday. Oil's Seven Sisters enters a golden age, Goldman Sachs says. For those interested, I believe it was even, it might have been even Al Jazeera that did this one up. I can't remember the exact media outlet. Look into the Seven Sisters. I watched probably a good weighty, it was, I think, 4 to 5 parts about these Seven Sisters because they literally control the oil industry. Okay, folks, you need to understand how important the oil industry has been because a vast majority of all that we've seen happen in this last 120 years all ties into this. So Rockefeller is your starting point, everything he was doing. Okay, then you can move forward. I don't, off the top of my head, remember the name of the documentary. There's a guy that wrote a book about this on top of it as well. It goes into excruciatingly detailed information concerning, oil, how it started. For instance, the candles and, they were wiping out the whales. This is how they were bringing forward oil in the beginning. Goes into all the details of what happened with Rockefeller, what he pulled. On top of it, all the illegal activities so that he could get to the front of this market. Okay, he is the, what would you call it, father, grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather of modern-day espionage. Because he was sending out basically spies all over the world so that he could stay on top of this and stay ahead of everybody. He's also that great-great-great-great-grandfather of modern-day philanthropy. Let's bring this up here. I brought up manufactured dissent. Okay, there was an article Matthew had posted concerning the climate change hoax. Now, there was a story released earlier this year that I knew about, because this is what caused me to look into this much deeper than just a surface glance. Because the article pointed out that ExxonMobil had known about this in the early 70s, and they already started looking into quote-unquote climate change, but they supposedly had restrained all this information. Okay, so of course when you see that, you're going, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? So of course this took a deeper look. But at the same time, we've been reporting on this for years. Okay, and the one article brought forward from one side will say, it'll tell you the ice caps are thicker than they have ever been in the Arctic Circle, up at the North Pole. Even though we were reporting on it at the time that the entire North Pole was melting. Everybody knew it. It was documented through satellite footage, video footage, photographic, and now they've frozen over again. Now, I had my roommate here, because when I found this, the next day I did a little test. I said, look into the ice thickness in the North Pole. 2 government websites, one that deals with the oceanic end of things, said one thing. Another government website said something else. Well, when I was looking through that previous night before I asked that question, didn't even know this, when she found it, I'm going, oh, that's even better. That proves my point. Well, I found out that the group that did the investigation, that brings it forward about Exxon and what they knew, so on and so forth, because it kind of ties into all of this. It turns out that, well, the people that are pushing the climate change is real, is under the Rockefeller Foundation. The people that are pushing that it's fake are under the Rockefeller Foundation. If you start looking deeper at it, you find out this entire manufactured dissent is being paid for by big oil. Both sides of this argument are funded by the same people. Okay, folks, and if you were to understand what at some point we will have to talk about, the discussion that Matthew and I had about what's happening in our universe and affecting our planet as we speak, keep that in mind, because you'll be highly disturbed, because either A, they've known about this since the 70s, or B, they don't know how to explain what's happening here. Either of which is not good. But now you get the understanding of why I brought up manufacturing dissent. Okay, this is big oil. The Seven Sisters, them releasing this article. Goldman Sachs, okay, look, folks, you need to look into them too. They're one of the biggest driving factors going back to World War I, World War II. I brought up the infamous brothers in this family. I'm a little tired of having to bring them up. Nonetheless, it's all tied together. Funding for the Bolsheviks, funding for Nazi Germany. Okay, and, they all talk about how our nation, there's this big conspiracy against our governing body by this infamous, that terminology I refuse to use, the military-industrial complex, because big oil is what fuels a military-industrial complex, folks. You have to have oil in order to fight a war, unless you do what Russia has just done and you create a missile that is powered by nuclear power. That's a little troublesome. Big oil is really quite a key to understanding the last 120 years. America, at one point in time, said, well, we're not going to back the dollar with gold anymore. We're not going to back it with silver. We're not going to back it with this. We're not going to back it with that. We're going to back it with petrol, with oil. Well, that's a little odd. But then, you know why? Because it forced every nation to have what? The U.S. dollar. Some people will refer to this as a hegemony. Well, yeah, I guess that would be an appropriate term. This goes into more explicit details about how it is that they've kept third world countries from not being able to move forward at all. I mean, people in America, we are completely sheltered from understanding this. I mean, you have these third world countries that have been driven into debt by this scheming in the financial realms that literally, for the most part, they're lucky if they can eat sand. I mean, I don't know what other thing to point at. They've lived in this kind of poverty for more years than I even want to bring up. And a vast majority of our modern-day Western world is not even aware of this. Unfortunately, in studying the last 120 years, well, you get a crash course in economics. But you get a crash course as well into even what the original, going back as far as when I started doing programs with Matthew, End Time Tribune commercial, America does have dark, dark secrets. And this is really, ultimately, one of the big keys to unlocking it all. Big oil is the revolving door for instance, a vast majority of the CIA in the field operatives. Okay, this is common knowledge again within the historical circles, within people that have worked on the inside, be it have worked in the CIA, the Justice Department. Okay, I go with these sources. I don't touch the nonsense. There's some good investigative reporters out there that write books, but when you're going to buy these books, you have to kind of spend at least a good couple of hours before you spend that money on these books, because it adds up after a while. I'm a little more hesitant to buy a book from a journalist unless I've already checked deeply into it ahead of time. I've looked at the material you can at least view in the book. But I spend more time actually dealing with the people that are on the inside that have witnessed this stuff. I mean, and this even includes, for instance, Danny Yatom from the Mossad. Great book he released. I haven't got to finish it yet. Someday I will. So I'm not bringing that up now. Well, I believe it off the top of my head, it was 6 Mossad agents spoke up concerning the current political circumstances and situation in Israel this week. I would go out and find that article immediately because there was a lot said, and I'm glad they spoke up the way they did. This specific Mossad leader, I brought up the book. Okay, he was working under Netanyahu at the time that he came to power during the Clinton administration, then forward. When Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, all of that, I've talked about this. But he was the head of Mossad at this point in time. So it's things like this, folks. This is where I get my information. That's where you kind of have to look. You have to look at the real facts. The things that they're bringing to you. You can find a lot of even well-done documentaries that save you some time, that really bring these things to light. Video footage right from the horse's mouth. You want to understand really global politics, geopolitics, your major starting point is what Matthew had me refer to. It is big oil. So now, to answer that question, we have known for quite some time there's been discussions about the petrodollar in China that they were going to create. Now, there's probably been discussion about this in Chinese media that I wasn't aware of. It's a possibility, but here in the West, this came from out of nowhere. This week with the markets, they've been playing games with everybody, and we really pay attention to, for instance, like where I usually get a lot of things concerning the West, I'll go to Reuters, for instance, or AP. That's where basically every journalist in the United States copies and pastes from anyways. So you're going to get the straight information, at least from the Western perspective, from those sources. Okay, and this just dropped from out of nowhere that they initiated this. Like I said, they've been playing games with the markets. Monday, they tell you that everything eased because there's talks going on between China and the United States to bring this not to happen. But it turns around within the next and even the same 24-hour stretch that he was talking to Angela Merkel, even Mr. Macron, France's leader, who's been in the news nonstop lately, about China's corrupt trade practices. So you see, they tell you one thing, then you hear another. Well, once again, the markets have been red, green, just from a simple illustration of a program pre-built into my phone. I can just swipe over and look, and then I go look what's really happening. So this is what's been going on. We had the meeting between Kim Jong-un and China that has now been verified. Before it was just speculation it was him. As Matthew brought up, it was a green train. That is the word that's underneath pale rider in the Bible, everybody. It is green. Nonetheless, they're talking. And people, we're getting the perspective that this is good. I'm going to give you a heads up. I don't think it is. China's fed up. Brought this up time and time again. This week they caught satellite imagery of a fleet that was doing military exercises. They finally have a real full-blown understanding now of China's naval power, something they did not know before. Oh boy. Them doing what they did with opening up the petro being linked to the Chinese currency. Okay, all these sanction games that the United States and all these other Western nations have been pulling, they can't do this anymore. They don't need to be linked to the American dollar anymore. Does everybody understand why the national security strategy that was released last year, now they listed Russia and China as being the key number one enemies? They are a threat to, quote-unquote, the U.S. security. Folks, this is happening because as far as China is concerned, it's a threat to their money. It's a threat to their almighty dollar. I mean, look, you can look deeply at the facts. This is why they're considering them a mega threat. There's very complex factors that are going on here with One Belt, One Road. I pay deep attention to this on a continual basis. Why? Because I've studied so very deeply everything I can get my hands on about Central Asia, China, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, because all those places are excruciatingly important. Most of your Bible scholars, the history ones, the eschatological ones, they've never even looked in these areas because people have been convinced that none of this is important. But it is. You know, we even have reports on the ground that I caught from somebody in Pakistan this week that had posted this, that the sanctions that were put into place on Pakistan recently actually targeted their nuclear missile sector. And we're not hearing this stuff in the Western media, and there's a lot of that going on. But this move, this is a declaration of war in the United States' eyes. China, with their basically with their training operations, is a show of force. They're letting everybody know we're not going to be rolled over like you think we are. We're not going to go through what the Western nations like Britain and France and all of them did with the great opium epidemic to completely collapse China back in those times. Okay, it ain't happening again. You have to understand, China became powerful because the United States used them for cheap labor. And look, I've studied the Chinese people in depth. You need to understand something, especially about these two parts of the world. Okay, China is a very ancient nation, a very ancient empire. God set them aside for a purpose. And if you don't look, we talked about this in the past, they have major prophecies concerning Messiah in their text that were 100% accurate to the actual date. but nobody usually talks about this very much. I've seen a few people have found out about this as well, and it comes up in conversation. I'd look into it. It's important. These kings of the East have been set aside. They've been protected. And this even goes back to, for instance, okay, you can go into the India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that whole region. Okay, you have texts that are very eye-opening that come all the way back from ancient times. The people in the 1800s from Britain, when Britain was, well, they were occupying India at the time. The stuff went on in Afghanistan, what is modern-day Pakistan, which this is only modern history when the split happened. You have ancient scholars in the 1800s that were completely baffled because they're going, we've got all the pieces in these historical stories that are completely broadening our understanding of what the Bible says. Okay, folks, I've gone through these texts. I've looked at them myself. It's true. I've done extensive work, a video showing where Eden is. Okay, folks, you're seeing the Swat Valley come up a whole lot in the news right now. Peshawar, you got a lot of these things right there. It's the reason it's all coming up in the news. And that was where, give it back over as we approach that 14 or so minute mark, and then in the overdrive with that little marker there. So we got to talk about Negev, where it is in the Bible. And let's see here, just to give a heads up, how many total times does it come up? Well, just the regular standard NASB 77 says 35 verse matches. But D. Brown's driver Briggs will tell you it's 114 occurrences. That's a big difference. Back over to you, Matthew.
Yes, it is, Brian. That's a whopping big difference. You have to be able to look at the Hebrew in order to deduct those things, where it's at, where it's used, how it's used.
Well, how do you like this one in Daniel 8, verse 4? I mean, folks, didn't I just bring this up? Listen, let me read it first, and sorry about that. I saw the ram budding westward, northward, southward, and no other beast could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased, and magnified himself. Okay, sorry about that.
That's right.
Go ahead.
That's right, because in this verse, ladies and gentlemen, you can't see what it actually says. Because how God actually wanted to be seen, it's in Hebrew, it's in Greek. You can't see it in your Bibles. But right there it is, staring you in your face. And the prophetic ramifications of it being there prophetically, because look, let me take everybody back to the basics for a second. One of the promises that we're going to get during the 1,000 millennial reign of Christ is we're going to be given a pure language. Let me give you a hint so you've at least got a clue about what I'm talking about. Everybody on this planet, every linguistic expert, they all know the closest pronunciation to Hebrew you can get is the variation that the Samaritans use. Look, ladies and gentlemen, the Orthodox rabbis will tell you this. Because God has taken all the vowels. There's no vowels in Hebrew. Now, it is of my educated opinion. You can take it with a grain of salt. I mean, you don't have to, quote this as fact. But it is my firm belief that that is the pure language we're going to get during the millennial reign of Christ. God will give us back the Hebrew vowels, so you know how to pronounce it. So this makes Hebrew an exclusively prophetic language. It's prophetic. That's why one of the key tools for anybody who utilizes the the Hebrew language is anagrams, ladies and gentlemen. God does it all. He does it with whole verses. He does it with whole phrases. He just takes the letters, rearranges them, and says something else. Massively important phrases, and all Hebrew scholars know this. When they want the technical data, they go to the Greek. When you want the prophetic information, you go to the Hebrew. It's a binary code, and all God-fearing, Bible-believing, gospel-preaching Christians know this. They know it. So, you need to understand that here, in the verse that Brian read, you need to understand that what they've done in Hebrew is they add their jots and tittles to it. Those are called cantillation marks. This is why you can prove the Masoretic text is true, because in it you'll come across a word that God has rearranged. Let's just use, for instance, okay, the word stumble as it occurs in Nahum. Just mentioned it. The verse right before it, see, I know it right off the top of my head. The verse before it mentions stumbling over corpses. The problem is that, well, God did something that, well, they don't quite understand what he did. He spelt that word with a yod instead of a vav. Okay? So, you know the Masoretic text is correct because they went ahead and put how it is spelt with a yod, but then, like in, how I explain it in Hebrew, they call it a Hebrew gloss. What they do is in parentheses, okay, they'll put how you should say that, and they say that you should say that with a vav. They really don't understand how that could be, spoken, pronounced, how it could be the word with a vav instead of a yod. So this is one of the ways you can prove that the Masoretic text is true, because the variations where they read it out loud, they put in parentheses because they don't quite understand why God would say it that way, but they believe it, so they chronicled it. Do you understand? This is a case in point. Because this very word that Brian read, you heard it with your ear as south. But that's not what God said. God said Negev. That's how you pronounce, that's how you see it in the news articles, is the Negev. So, with that being said, I will pass it back to Brian. I've explained that in pretty simple English so that people understand that, ladies and gentlemen, you're only supposed to read the English to get the stories, okay? The English is in no way, shape, or form qualifiable for use in exegetical studies. Spanish translation would be 1,000,000,000 times better for any type of exegesis, any type of formal declaration. Because, of course, the Spanish has your variances with both feminine and masculine and plural and singular forms. So you could actually make a far superior Spanish translation than you ever could in English. So, with that being said, you have to learn the gospel with your language. But you cannot understand the parable unless you read the binary source code that is complete manuscript in Hebrew complete manuscript in Greek. So, Brian, where is this word for Negev in the Bible? I mean, we certainly don't have the time to cover all of them, but I'm sure God has pointed some out to you you'd like to cover, so go right ahead. You have the floor.
Well, and I mean, folks, let me point this out ahead of time. It's sort of key critical you understand the first mention of what we have here in Genesis 12:9. Okay, we have the stretching through Genesis 13, 20, 24, 28. We move into Exodus 26, 18, 27, 36, 38, Numbers 13, 21, 33, 35, Deuteronomy 1, 3, Joshua. Okay, this is all stretching all through. Goes into Judges, 1 Samuel, 1 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel 8, Daniel 11, Obadiah, Zechariah. That's just one form. Now, there's just two little key verses that I really stand out like a sore thumb that I had pasted in here to Matthew. This one's from Jeremiah 13, verse 19. This is where you have to read the whole chapter, everybody, and even surrounding really will help. The cities of the Negev have been locked up, and there's no one to open them. All of Judah has been carried into exile. Wholly carried into exile. Jeremiah 32. Men shall buy fields for money, sign and seal deeds, and call in witnesses in the land of Benjamin, in the environs of Jerusalem, in the cities of Judah, in the cities of the hill countries, in the cities of the lowland, and in the cities of the Negev, for I will restore their fortunes, declares the Lord. Well, folks, this is like all late breaking news. I've talked about what's been going on behind the scenes here about fields for money, sealed deeds, call witnesses. All of this has been happening. What I brought up, previous verse, cities of the Negev have been locked up, and there's no one to open them. Folks, that's late breaking because we're having it happening right in front of our eyes. And I know some of you have been convinced, well, this all happened in the past. No, God told you that which has been is that which will be. There's nothing new under the sun. Multiple places, we've talked about this for years. He goes out of his way to make certain that you know that history is going to repeat itself. And all these points that I just brought up with all these variable places where we're finding this word. Okay, folks, these are all important. But I'm just bringing up the prophetic text for this moment. We are coming to the 1 minute mark before overtime. Okay, we have this coming up in Isaiah 21, verse 1. The oracle concerning the wilderness of the sea as the windstorms in the Negev sweep on. It comes in from the wilderness, from a terrifying land. Okay, folks, we've talked about this. From the wilderness, from a terrifying land. Here, let me read this headline, folks. I actually pulled these up previous. This is out of Arut Sheva. Egypt and Jordan blast Israel over Gaza deaths. Okay, let me read this verse again and explain. The oracle concerning the wilderness of the sea, as windstorms in the Negev sweep on. It comes from the wilderness, from a terrifying land. All right, folks, I want you to go out there and look into the new work that is being done by a lot of chronologists that have done painstaking work on the ground even. Okay, these places they are referring to is what we refer to now as the Sinai Peninsula. The location, if we really want to take it to that extreme as well, for the wilderness. I brought this up a little bit. A lot of work has been done by a lot of reliable people, and you're looking at what in ancient times was Petra. That is modern-day Jordan. Let's go to the next verse. A harsh vision has been shown to me. The treacherous one still deals treacherously, and the destroyer still destroys. Go up, Elam. Lay siege, Media. I have made an end of all the groaning she has caused. For this reason, my loins are full of anguish. Pains have seized me like the pains of a woman in labor. I am so bewildered I cannot hear, so terrified I cannot see. My mind reels, horror overwhelms me. All right, everybody. I'm going to go into a little history lesson here quickly. You know, if you study the Bible, you really come to the conclusion that you have to know who Cyrus the Great was. But this has been a very difficult process. You know, archaeology, the way it is, takes years to sometimes come to knowing and understanding all this. I don't think it helps that the French have done a lot of that work, and that is not being translated about 90% of the time into English. The French people know a lot more than the rest of the world. Elam. Okay, Cyrus the Great was from Anshan. This was Elam. Okay? He was... Okay, Elam refers to where he came from. Okay, this was ancient times. Elam, an ancient empire that was just something released archaeologically this week. I've told people about this for years. They found the proof. Okay, they now know that in very early times that the Sumerian Empire was engaged in maritime trade, stretching back, way back, with, and they put in there, Iran. Well, they've confused you by doing that. They were trading with Elam. It also states in this same article, it's been proven too now that they were trading with India. I have talked about this for years. Now it's verifiable. They have found the evidence to support this. He was an Elamite. Okay? Cyrus of Anshan. He did not worship, well, it's Asher. Okay? We talked about this before. That's when Darius the Great seized the reins. You're talking about two different groups of people, two different places. Madai, or Media, as it's referred to here, it's in your table of nations. It's a different family tree. Okay? So now we understand why the Lord is really amplifying this, because, well, we have both of these people in the news absolutely nonstop lately. There are some, genetically speaking, within the Kurdish people that are of Median descent. Okay, the Kurdish genetic line is a lot more complex, but when you understand the history of those areas, you understand why the Kurdish people have quite a few people mixed in with them. But it takes going through the history books to understand. It's a lot of work. I'm not going to even pretend it's not. But nonetheless, that's why their genetic traces are showing this. The Kurds have been at the heart of everything lately. Okay, folks, I very strongly advise you pay attention to this. Now, let's go back to the Sinai, because these reports are coming out all over the world. The United States military, from their own defense site, is trying to state that Russia is spreading propaganda that the Islamic State is rising up again. I am watching reports on the ground in these places. The Khorasan branch, we did an audio episode through one of our other formats that is out there. I don't remember exactly how people can get a hold of this, Matthew may be able to explain that, but nonetheless, we did a complete show on the Black Flags of Khorasan. Okay, this is tied into Islamic beliefs, their prophetic end-time beliefs. It's very important. When you see Islamic State of Khorasan stretches from a corridor of Pakistan, Iran, to Afghanistan. Okay, these reports on the ground are saying it's gotten out of control there. They are coming back. In the Sinai, this is what's been going on with Sisi, who just, managed to get rid of everybody standing in his way. And I'm sure the election results are probably out there now. The voting's going on. He has nobody standing against him. It's all over the news as well. Well, in the Sinai, they've been dealing with varied branches of different terror groups. This is one complex thing you can't understand in 5 minutes. But Islamic State is in the mix, and pretty heavily in the mix, in the Sinai. Sisi has sent troops in there to try to deal with it. The first set of them, they were not prepared, not trained for what they had to deal with. It didn't turn out well. And this is ongoing in the Sinai, which borders the south border, Gaza Strip. Okay, so you've got the Egyptians also have locked down those borders as well from Gaza. All of a sudden, that little thing that I read earlier about Gaza being locked down starts going to perspective. Okay? The Israeli military has put it on lockdown. This just keeps going. Okay? So our first, on top of it, in the books of, as they refer to them as the prophetic books, even though as Matthew and I have stated time and time again, the entirety of the Bible. If you want to understand end-time prophecy, well, end-time prophecy is from the very first word that God speaks until the very last word that is spoken in the Bible. That's really what it comes down to. But in this text, this is telling you in broad daylight the things we're looking at as we speak. You can continue on. This just keeps going. Okay, folks, if you don't have access to even, for instance, paper versions of concordances where you can get this information, you don't have access to a computer to easily pull this up, whatever it may be, if you need to contact, you can email me at thebandsofTime@gmail.com. I'll gladly send you this simple list right from the dictionary concordance of the 114 verses. All of this is important. And I'll let Matthew pick out a few more here before we go into the last moments of the show.
Well, that's the thing, Brian. We are in the last moments of the show. I've got very little that I can do or say now. And I think maybe that was the point tonight, Bri. I've had very little to say in the past 2 hours and 11 minutes. And you know what? I think that's a good thing. We did talk about what's going on in this solar system. And you're right, that's for a different time. And I think the show progressed exactly how it should have progressed, and it required very little input from me. But we are literally down here to the last 3 minutes. So, your closing comments. As for me, till next time, ladies and gentlemen, God bless and Godspeed, and we'll just let Brian have the floor until the show shuts off. So, Brian?
Well, this is my starting comments tie into my closing, and even further, folks. There is so much happening that I can't even keep up with it. I am spending so many hours staying on top of the news, trying to do other historical work in the background as well through books and so on. It's really There's a lot going on. And we've got a lot of people out there that are not touching on any of these things. Folks, don't let this come on you unaware. Because it's coming. I don't know how else to say it. Matthew from 2010 has been warning about this very window in time. When I came around in around 2011, going forward a bit, also, you could see we were entering this. And now it's in front of us. Getting your house in order. Man, oh man, people don't live by that last moment. Okay, my brother just from out of nowhere, random car accident in the middle of the day. He's no longer here with us. My wife's father, from out of nowhere on Purim last year. Nobody knew that was coming either. It's no longer with us. Do not live like there's no tomorrow. It can come at any moment. Just the loss of your own life. Extending it out to even further so. Look. Getting your house in order. It encompasses part of it. Start being alert. Start looking. Start critically thinking. When you look. If you got to get into the history books to understand this stuff, do what you need to do. Get into the Bible. Begin studying as well. We've been bringing this forward. Matthew started in 2010. Me in the midst of 2011. We've been trying to get all of this through to everybody all this time. There's so much we still technically need to do. And it'll get done in its course, in its time. Just keep your eyes on all of it, folks. Pay attention as you go out over the holiday here. And just kind of, wonder how many of these people are actually aware of what's happening. And I mean, I'm referring to those that are, that say they're Christians, or those that are Christians. There is two different ones. Just pay attention.